up, we have Corey duBrowa, Senior Vice President of Global Communications and Internal Public Affairs at Starbucks Coffee Company. Corey is responsible for global communications and international public affairs for Starbucks. He leads efforts to extend integrating brand marketing campaigns, support new product launches, enhance and maintain the company's reputation, and manage executive participation in industry events. So you do a few things. Prior to Starbucks, Corey spent a decade as president of North American New Business Development at Wainwright Stroman Worldwide and served in client-side communications capacity for Nike prior to that, leading employee communication efforts and urban marketing strategy. Welcome. Next up, we have Tim Smith, Senior Vice President, Corporate and Public Affairs for Edelman. Tim has more than 2 decades of public relations and public affairs experience spanning government, industry, and agency roles. He provides communications counsel to a range of clients on issues management, stakeholder engagement, corporate reputation, thought leadership, and crisis communications. So take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I've never heard of like the quiet coyote before. Does anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you have kids, you know the quiet coyote.
All right. I do, and I don't know it. So you'll get another dad parenting moment.
It works.
Fantastic. We're only a minute into it too. So I am not Vivek Verma. That's sort of my opening line here. My boss, Vivek, is actually meant to be the keynoter, and so I apologize in advance for not being Vivek. I'll do my best to channel Vivek, sans the Oklahoma accent, and some other peculiarities of the. But anyway, Tim and I have known one another for some time. I mean, going back to the Wagon days. So if it feels like we're just sort of having a conversation amongst ourselves, like just throw stuff at us and get your attention.
So, well, Corey, thanks for making the time. And you know, certainly Starbucks is a well-known, iconic brand to Seattle, and I think it's now very loud. And so everyone here is familiar with the company, and I think probably the roots. And last year was a really big year for the company in terms of the 40th anniversary. I think it'd be very interesting for us to hear a little bit about the communications function, first of all, your role, and how you made the transition from an agency role to a corporate role, and then talk a bit about last year and the activities for the 40th anniversary, kind of how, from a corporate communications standpoint, the various different things came together for such a successful year.
Okay, how much time do we have? That was a long question with a couple parts. So why don't I start with the, can you guys hear okay, first of all? Okay. Why don't I start with the how we're organized part, just since we're among communications professionals, among friends, it might be good just to sort of start there. And I'll say hello to all the fellow Starbucks partners in the audience. You guys can keep me honest throughout this entire discussion, so feel free to correct me or, you know, add on as you go. So at Starbucks, our public affairs function reports directly to Howard Schultz, and we have some constituent pieces that make up public affairs. So my team, Global Communications, essentially leads outbound or stakeholder communications. There is what we call partners, everybody else in the world would refer to as employees. So we have a partner communications and engagement team that is very active, very thoughtful in terms of thinking about how we communicate with employees. And I want to return to that because I think that's actually one of the secret sauce things about Starbucks that may not be widely known outside the company, but I think is actually quite unique, and I think to some extent makes us what we are, which is that we tend to start with, from a communications point of view, our employees are our partners first. I think that makes us just different in terms of the rhythm that we go about doing it. We have a team that's focused on community, policy, and diversity, and then another team that's focused on our global responsibility efforts, which include a host of different things, including sustainability, our ethical sourcing of our coffee, and a whole host of things in between. So all of those things together comprise our public affairs team. So typically whenever we're thinking about a campaign, and I'll talk a little bit about the 40th anniversary and some of the throughputs of that, we'll do that in an integrated fashion. So we're thinking about it as a team. What can the constituent parts contribute to the campaign as a whole? What are the outcomes for the campaign, and then what are the milestones along the way? So that gives you some sense of kind of what the team is.
How large is the team? How many people you have working?
In Seattle, within those functions, it's more than 50. And then if you go beyond that to teams that are engaged in those functions in Europe and Asia, and the individual, in the Americas and individual markets, it scales up. So last year, a couple of things happened last year that made last year unique. And I have some visuals, Danny, thank you in advance for helping me with that I think will make the conversation a little bit more engaging in terms of bringing to life some of what we did. But three things happened last year that I thought were interesting in the sort of lifespan, the corporate lifespan of Starbucks. One is that we turned 40. And really what we wanted to do was make that 40th anniversary more a celebration of our customers having been with us for 40 years than anything internally facing. I mean, everybody has a birthday or everybody has these sort of milestone dates as a company, but the thing that's more interesting is sort of the outbound manifestation of that. Why is it interesting for customers? It was really meant to be sort of a thank you for the people who've been with us for that long. The second thing that happened is that we've embarked upon, for the last couple of years, this strategy that we call the Blueprint for Growth. And it's effectively a way to speak to the audiences that care the most about that outside the company. So shareholders, the street, institutional kinds of investors, as well as, frankly, like business publications and partners that we have in the business, third parties, about what our growth plans are. And it used to be sort of years ago with Starbucks that the way that people gauged that you were successful from a growth standpoint was how many zeros were behind the number of stores that you had open. And for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which was the financial meltdown of 2008, we ran into some real economic headwinds in terms of being able to sustain that kind of growth. And so we did what a lot of businesses had to do during that period of time. We closed stores. The first time in the history of the company, we had to lay people off. It was a traumatic moment for us. And I think we had to recalibrate where our growth ambitions were beyond just store growth. And so we had to look at other ways that we might grow. And one of the ways that we had already been invested in growing was through what we call CPG, or the grocery channel, where Starbucks products were actually showing up in your grocery store or in mass or drug or whatever. And it started to get confusing for our customers when you were selling, for example, strawberries and cream ice cream. And you had a logo on it that said Starbucks coffee. This really happened that way. We would get calls to our customer center that would say, is there coffee flavor in that ice cream? And you'd kind of be like, it's strawberries and cream, but okay. Like you would sort of understand why it was confusing for people. And so when you think about what our logo used to look like, what the brand used to look like, it was the siren, and then she was locked within this circle that said Starbucks coffee. And for a lot of reasons, I mean, that was great. It served us well for the first 40 years. It was very clear the purpose of what the company was, the core of our business. But it didn't really encapsulate what our future growth ambitions might be if we were, for example, to buy a juice company, which we did back in November, called Evolution. Not coffee, and certainly something that we would plan to sell in our stores as well as grocery. And as it happened, we actually opened up a concept store in the Bell Square Mall specifically devoted to that product. And so we needed to think about our brand in a different way.
And does that expand beyond food products? Because I know there's been a lot of talk in the past about music and media getting into that. Is that also part of getting away from the coffee designation?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is no. I think we're going to stick really with sort of our core knitting. But within the knitting, I mean, we think that because our customers care about health, wellness, those kinds of things, juice fits well within that the brand wasn't really, I think the iconography of the brand or the visual taxonomy of the brand didn't really allow us or explain very clearly what we were up to. And so we removed the ring from the siren. She's now siren only, which in some ways is very similar to the experience I had back at Nike in the 90s when the company went swoosh only. There were a lot of similar kind of growth ambitions and similar visual iconography issues that Nike was trying to solve then that Starbucks solved last year. And then the last piece of what we did, and we'll get to the video, is that Howard, during the worst of this sort of financial downturn, so he came back in 2008, is that right? 2008. And when he came back, he was essentially sort of kind of journalizing what his learnings were. Because it was a pretty brutal time. I mean, you have to make those kind of decisions, shut stores, lay partners off, thinking back to the core business differently. To your point, Tim, is sort of, hey, we got into the music business, hey, we're getting out of the music business. I mean, those are not decisions to be taken lightly. And so he was taking notes of all this for himself, which formed kind of a narrative of what he was learning, and by extension what the company was learning. And some friends of his were telling him, Howard, this is really interesting. You ought to think about capturing this in a different way. Maybe you can publish a book. The book might be helpful to entrepreneurs, in some cases who are going through a second wave of growth with their companies that, they're going through a difficult time. Everybody's having to deal with the same economic headwinds that you are. And I think for a variety of reasons, Howard at first demurred on that, and then later came to realize that perhaps there was enough there to share with people. And so he did write this book, Onward, and the third thing that happened during this last year was we took him out on a book tour. Now, going out on a book tour these days is very different than probably what it was in the past, right? I mean, first of all, there aren't as many places to sell books. There aren't as many people who buy physical books. You have to sort of think about the whole Kindle or digital book universe. The way that books are even captured in terms of sales is interesting. We learned this whole sort of wealth of facts about how a book becomes a New York Times bestseller, which, by the way, this one was. It was the number one on the bestseller list the first week it came out. But what it takes to make that happen is labyrinthine. It's hard to explain. We probably don't have time for it. But anyway, it was an interesting period of time, and I think what we were thinking of with the book tour is sort of back to this point about our partner lens that we put on communication. It was a very Starbucks-specific experience. We knew we wanted Howard to be in all of our major markets, so that meant 3 continents worth of a tour, meant 20 markets. We knew that we wanted him to be able to tell the story of the book to media so that it would sell, because all the proceeds of the book went to charity, so we wanted that to happen. And then the third thing, and probably the most important, was if we're going to be in all these markets, we want Howard to be able to engage with our partners. And so this book tour kind of took on the dimensions almost of like a presidential tour. It was very interesting in terms of, sort of president comes to market, president gives some speech, president raises money, president does media interviews, president goes away. I mean, in some ways that was kind of the model for the way that we were thinking about how the tour would run, because Howard did, he's a CEO, he's got a day gig, so he didn't have lots of time to devote to this. So we really wanted to get maximum leverage for the time spent. So the first video we're going to show is a piece that you'll understand why I call it this after you watch it. We affectionately, inside the company, call it Star Buddy. And the purpose for the video was to serve as the linchpin for our partner events. So when we would come to a market, let's say Chicago, we would have the local GM invite literally hundreds of store partners from around that region to like a ballroom or something like that. There would be coffee tasting, there would be the opportunity for partners who never meet each other in real life to meet one another, a chance for them to meet Howard, to speak with local leadership. And we used the video as a way to kind of essentially hold a mirror up to our partners and say, here's who you are. Here is Starbucks. And so it was a really fun piece. Our partner team did a terrific job with it, and we should just show it now. I'll do that.
Don't you hate this part when you're a communicator?
Speaking of communicating, if you want to follow along on Twitter, the hashtag.
Thank you, Sean.
But the hashtag is IABC Seattle.
You might be able to find the video online somewhere. Sorry, how about if I act it out?
It's about a 5 or 6 minutes. I think very
So, Corey, you have any recollection of how many stops, how many tour?
Yeah, it's nearly 20. Between all the stops that we had in North America, we had 2 different. There we go. We had 2 different tours of Europe and then Asia beyond that. we can get into
Do you have
that.
any sense of how many partners actually were touched through the various events?
I do. It was more than 10,000. Gosh, almost 200,000 total. So yeah, clearly a percentage, like a smidgen of what the total population is to be fair.
Okay, I might have to put the mic up to my computer, but at least we've got video now.
This is like the.
Is this it? Oh my God, all right.
Okay.
This is frustrating. I'm sorry. Oh.
It's okay. Why don't we move on?
Yes.
We'll try video too after this.
Yes.
So what you couldn't hear is there's a partner who I want to say he's probably like maybe 19 years old, 18 years old, something like that. James from Lake Tahoe. He's a ski bum. So the whole purpose for the video again was to sort of hold a mirror up to our population to kind of validate who we are, like the diverse tapestry of people who make up the Starbucks partner population. So you saw James, the "Hey Star Buddy," which he really does say. You can't make this up. But James, the ski bum, who says directly in the video that one of the reasons why the Starbucks is I can kind of go from mountain town to mountain town. It's a great way for me to pursue what I love, which is skiing and boarding, and still have a job. We go from that to a whole host of other partner dialogues, including a pair of partners in Minneapolis who worked together, one of whom actually gave a body organ to the other for medical reasons. I know, it's just, you can't believe the kind of stories that you can unearth about the brand, about the company, when you go out and ask, which is really what our partner team did. They went out and just asked a simple question, who are you, why do you work at Starbucks, what do you find interesting here? And these stories came back. And so the purpose of the tour was really, I think, to help partners to be able to connect with leadership, to connect with the vision of the company, I think to celebrate for a minute. You don't turn 40 every year, so there's that aspect, but also I think to prepare our partner population for what was coming, which was sort of the outbound marketing of this to our customers, and to be able to say thank you to customers for sticking with us for that period. And so you're kind of going down the path I was thinking about, which is sort of like, okay, so what is the so what of all of this? Why do it, or kind of what happened as a consequence of that? And I think there were three things that were interesting that came about from last year and actually led us a bit to kind of where we are today. One was just the partner piece of it, where I don't remember or can't remember really another year in which we had the opportunity to have so much touch directly with our partner population. I mean, for those of you who look after internal communications within your companies, I mean, you know that there's a difference between sort of like you push send on a piece of mail that goes company-wide, no matter how fancy the mail is or how great the engagement is with digital bells and whistles that go with it, and actually being able to engage with your partners, get feedback, create a forum for dialogue and meaningful engagement rather than just sort of like we're going to push communication out. And so I think that was one big opportunity for us during an important year. And that gave Howard, I think, the chance to talk about in some detail the new brand, kind of where we were going with the blueprint for growth, what it meant to be an organization that really leads with its values, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that was kind of the first thing. The second thing was we sold a lot of books. We gave a lot of money to charity. That was great. And I think kind of validated some of Howard's thoughts about the value of what he was capturing, what he was journaling.
And the book made it all the way to number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list.
It did. And the Wall Street Journal and some others. And really, all those things are probably less important other than like how cool it is to be able to tell your mom, like, hey, remember my book in the New York Times bestseller list? And more that, the story resonated for people, and I think the kind of feedback that we got was that there was a lot of learning that was shareable beyond Starbucks. It wasn't so specific to the company that entrepreneurs, business leaders, others couldn't take kind of a page from it and feel like they learned something. And then the third thing was to really root the new brand manifestation in something real. And I'll spare you guys kind of a recitation of all the facts and figures, but what we did from an earned media point of view around this. So aside from the partner connection, aside from selling books, being able to give money back and put our money where our mouth was. The amount of earned media value that we were able to create last year with these couple of events was just phenomenal. I mean, when you total it all up, when you look at what happened with the brand, when you look at what happened with the partner tour and everything in between, I mean, we're talking billions of impressions, billions. Just scary numbers, which, for us communicators, it's great because that's one of the ways where we can go back to our leadership team and say, we created a moment that not only resonated but created great value around the brand. It came at a time when stock price was spiking, our results on a quarter-over-quarter basis were starting to show that momentum was back in the business. So it felt like, for people who were at the company during the darkest days, when we were having to close stores, when we were having to tell the outside world we got to retrain our people because we don't really know coffee like we should or like our customers expect us to. I think it felt like we turned the corner. So
Completely different, night and day, 180 degrees. And speaking from an agency perspective, I mean, those impressions are priceless. Right? You can't put a value on this.
you can try, doesn't
You can try, but you
try.
can't.
Yes.
I want to shift gears a little bit, Corey, and talk about another, and it relates to partner engagement and this whole idea of this global month of service. Just wrapped up another successful launch. And can you speak a little bit about the history of that initiative, why Starbucks does it, and maybe along the same lines, how you use it to engage with your various different audience groups? I know it touches both your customers, communities, but also your partners.
Yeah. So Starbucks' history with community engagement, I mean, it goes back to the very beginning of the company. I mean, you have to think about the business we're in, right? I mean, we're in the coffee business. We're an inherently social business. And the one thing, when we think about the way that we engage with the communities that our people live in and that our customers live in and that we serve, the one thing that we always think about is that, first of all, we're not really into checkbook philanthropy. There are a lot of organizations that can sort of bust open a giant checkbook, write a check with lots of zeros behind it, and give it to organizations. And there's that, and then there's engagement. And so what we think about is what is authentic to our brand. It doesn't mean that, hey, it's great to be able to give to communities. It's great to be able to do really whatever an organization thinks is authentic or right for it. What's authentic and right for us is that we have 17,000 stores and going on almost 60 countries, 200,000 people that wear the green apron, whether they wear it directly to the company or through like a licensee. And because we're in all of those communities and because we do partner surveys every year, we'll ask our partner population, why do you work at Starbucks? What is important to you? One of the things that comes up every year is, I care about the community that I live in. My customers care about it, and Starbucks gives me the opportunity to get plugged into my community in a way that maybe I couldn't if I worked somewhere else. So we know that there's this nice confluence of things. We have a history of having done it. It's the place where most authentically we can sort of mass a result. We can get people to go out and do things in the communities, and because our partners tell us that they care about this, we wanted some sort of a galvanizing event. The galvanizing event became the Global Month of Service, which is April. And so this is our second year of having done Global Month of Service in the way that we've chosen to do it. And effectively what we've done is we've turned back to the communities and said, what is the most meaningful thing that we could do? And so our store leadership is literally in touch with NGOs and other community organizations literally around the world during the month of April, where we are able to identify projects that our people can get engaged in. It's not just our people, it's our partners, it's our customers, sometimes it's these third-party organizations. I mean, it really is a moment to galvanize the community and go out and literally get to work, roll up our sleeves, do work that's meaningful in the community. And that takes on any number of forms. It could be a park cleanup, it could be painting murals in a school, it could be working with third-party organizations that help the homeless, the hungry. The idea is not to dictate kind of what the project should be, so much as to make it relevant to those communities, give our partners the chance to get plugged in and see what kind of good we can do. And so last year, we were able to, in the month of April, give literally hundreds of thousands of hours of service back to these communities. This year, it'll be even more than that. And I think what we were thinking of, maybe less than the number of hours, which in that itself is interesting, is more the number and kind of projects that our people were engaged in. So I think the quality of the engagement that we have with the communities that we serve has gone up pretty measurably on a year-over-year basis. And the other point that, just to throw this out there that we thought was important this year was to not make it about the month of April necessarily. It's a great way to capture a lot of activity in 1 month, but the reality is that there are needs year-round in all these communities. Our partners are doing things year-round. Our customers are telling us the kinds of things we ought to be engaged in year-round. Need has no schedule. And so I think one of the things we wanted was to use this as sort of a spotlight to call attention, not necessarily to what we were doing, but what the needs are. And to be able to use, Howard uses this phrase a lot, and I love it, it's to use our scale for good. You might as well embrace what you have, the assets that you have. And what we do know is we have stores, partners, and a real desire to engage. And I think that scale applies itself in a way that hopefully will extend beyond April and give us a chance to do a lot more good in a lot more communities over a much longer period.
And how do you implement the program? Are there requirements for your stores or partners to do that, or is it just there's a framework and then
there's a framework? It's malleable. There's kind of almost a pairing, if you want to look at it that way, between sort of there's a vast array of things that we could do. So you're not going to be able to do everything, but I think a lot of it comes down to where we have the best chance to sort of collapse some projects into a specific day or a couple of days where in the local area you can get the kind of scale that's appropriate. If you've got the kind of project that requires literally hundreds of customers. So I was in London last week with the European leadership team there for a series of meetings. Their community day was on Friday. And the kind of projects that they were engaged in that community were literally the kind that hundreds of our partners could get engaged with. And these are people that work in a store, so it had to be kind of scalable to a day. You had to be able to come in the morning, maybe you had a shift in the afternoon, or whatever the case may be. So you have to create an opportunity where people can kind of come in and out and still be able to create the impact that you hope for.
You mentioned being in London, and I understand you're spending a fair amount of your time these days focused on EMEA. Can you talk a little bit from the perspective of a global corporation of the differences, the global differences or the regional differences? I would have to believe that a Starbucks and communications for Starbucks in Seattle is very different from communications in the ecosystem around a Starbucks in, say, Geneva, Switzerland.
Yeah, I mean, there are some similarities and there are some differences. So I'll use London as an example. I mean, it is, without question for me, kind of the most sophisticated, stroke, difficult media market in the world, in the sense that, they still, I mean, it's funny, right? We all kind of sit around as communicators and talk about the death of media. Traditional media is dying. You would not know that to walk around the streets of London. I mean, with the number of broadsheets, publications, I mean, there is a very healthy, thriving traditional media business in London, and, that demand curve creates a huge footprint for stories to exist. And so, with the footprint comes good and bad. I mean, comes the opportunity to tell your story, but also comes a lot of dross. Comes a lot of space for things that you don't.
Phone taps and other sorts of things.
Potentially. Of course, we're still sorting all that out. The Murdoch-alypse is still happening, but yeah, I think my experience just over the last week and looking at where narratives are being driven from, and what constitutes news, and how do you break through clutter. I mean, all those things are relatively similar. The way that we think about as communicators pitching a journalist here in the U.S. is not obviously a whole lot different from the way that you would do it in London or in UK media, other than knowing what the landscape is and understanding. I mean, literally last week, while we were in the middle of these meetings, 2 major markets in Europe slid into double-dip recession within 24 hours of one another. And so, first Spain and then the UK. In Spain, 50% of people under the age of 25 are unemployed. And actually, I think the number is probably higher than that. They just have a hard time capturing it because so many people have dropped out of the labor force. And so when you think about what that kind of environment produces, in some ways, what we're experiencing now in Europe is actually very similar to what Starbucks, the brand and company, and frankly a lot of your organizations experienced back in 2008. I mean, you've got severe economic headwinds, you've got political regimes that are in almost complete retreat or changing out entirely. I think we're going to see a whole new political situation in France here within the next week and a half. There are other countries, I think, that have similar potential to either change over, or in the case of Italy, you've got a brand new prime minister who's just wrestling with how many things can I fix at once? There's so much that's wrong. You have to kind of take it a step at a time. And so all of that forms the backbone of the environment in which we have to tell stories. And so, there's either, the story we had to tell last week during our earnings call, which is, hey, we're not immune to the economic circumstances. Our Europe business is by far the toughest region in which we operate right now. Or stories that fly against that, like our community engagement, where regardless of the economic headwinds, we're still going to do what's right for communities. We're still going to do what's right for the brand, even if it comes at a cost that, frankly, kind of flies in the face of some of the economic reality of the moment. So it's a great learning opportunity. I mean, for anybody who's spent time either living in another market, working in another market, helping another market, or a set of markets, literally for me, it's become an exercise of sort of putting on different hats any given day. Where, literally this morning is a good example where I kind of had my Europe hat on for like the first 3 hours of the day, because that's the time in which those meetings were occurring to make up for the time difference with Europe. And so we're going through our strategic plan. We've got some things that we're trying to roll out in terms of news over the next 3 or 4 weeks. That was the morning, and then you sort of flip the switch, and the U.S. becomes the afternoon. So it's a terrific learning opportunity. But I wake up every day realizing how little I know, how much there is to learn, and how malleable the circumstances are. When it's this fluid, when there's this much going wrong all at once in the world, in the economy, with politics, it's humbling right now.
I would be interested in how many people here are members of the Starbucks rewards program, gold card carriers. Gold card carrier myself.
I love you all. Thank you.
And I also submitted an idea long ago to mystarbucksidea.com, and so I wanted to go a little bit down that road and talk about.
What was your idea? Can't you look at us, Dad? Are you asking me to do something that would betray our
No, these were my own days, but I'll share sort of insights on my Starbucks habit, which is that I typically go for the drip coffee, which sometimes is called brewed or sometimes drip, or depending which the store you're in. And I always, in the summer, like the iced coffee. But the price point difference there is significant. And so I was thinking, can't you take the drip coffee and just add ice and charge whatever amount? Well, and that was my idea, something along those lines. And I found out subsequently, and I don't even remember, this was years ago, when the site first launched, why I learned this, but it's a different, the iced coffee is actually made from the Americano base, so it's a different type. If you just put regular, what comes out of the machine, brewed coffee over ice, it's a different type of experience. So I hereby withdraw my idea. But I wanted to
It's a good one, Tim. Don't do that. Have any of you, this is actually a great conversation, have any of you guys submitted ideas to my Starbucks idea before? You have. So what was your idea?
Having same size lids for all the permanent cups, the actual cups.
Yeah.
Having the same size lid so that you can interchange them and not worry about it at the end of the wash.
That's a great idea. Bill, what was your idea?
Channel, I don't recall, but I do remember it was brilliant.
Well, I do recall that there are some ideas that were actually implemented, and I'm not sure if this was one of them, but I think one of the most brilliant innovations of the 21st century were those little sticks that you plug up the hole. I think that came through myidea.com, and there's a technical term for those.
The still stick it did come directly from my Starbucks idea, as did the idea to receive a coupon on your birthday. I mean, there are a host of ideas, right? I mean, we're now going into I think, almost a couple hundred ideas that come specifically from our customers or just, entrepreneurs with a terrific idea submitted through my Starbucks idea. And if you talk to the team that helped implement the site and what they've learned from it, gosh, I wish those people were here today. It's a terrific story. I mean, just the idea of, it was, again, sort of during the dark days of having to close stores and rethink our business model and everything else. And, it came from a conversation that Howard had with Michael Dell. And the gist of the conversation boiled down to this, which is simply, you guys have such strong engagement with your customer base already. And a lot of that customer base already lives online to a certain extent. You can have an idea box in every store, or you can make that digital and perhaps act on it in a quicker fashion. And as it turns out, we ended up obviously doing both. We kind of had the notion of being able to bring us ideas anytime. But what MSI did in terms of just the sheer volume of ideas that came through, how we could implement those, and the dialogue that it created, right? I think that's the thing maybe as communicators that the digital landscape is sort of giving birth to for all of us, which is less of a, let's have messages and push them, which was sort of maybe the way some of us were brought up in the industry, and much more of a discussion that you have with stakeholder groups. And I think that MSI, along with what we've done on all these different social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, what we're seeing now on Instagram, Pinterest, if you guys are on that, it's super interesting. These are all just forums for engagement, dialogue, and discussion. And so I love what we learned from that. I think probably we wouldn't have done what we did with Facebook, now more than 30 million friends, fans, likers, whatever we're calling them. Twitter, the growth wouldn't have happened in the same way that it did, I think, had we not learned some of the lessons that we did through MSI. So, yeah, we could go on forever about that.
And certainly all of us as communicators are familiar with the surge in social/digital media. And can you talk a little bit about the media mix for Starbucks, going from more of the traditional side, and how much effort you're putting sort of in earned media versus the social media, social engagement?
Yeah, we can talk about that. So the way that we tend to think, remember I talked at the beginning about how as a public affairs team we're thinking about things in an integrated way. So how are we communicating to stakeholder groups, to partners? How does our content mesh up with that? That's the way we might think within the public affairs team. And then how does that public affairs team mesh its efforts with the digital team or the marketing and category teams, and how do those kind of campaigns work? And so increasingly, whenever we look at a campaign that we're launching, and actually this past week for us was the beginning of summer. It doesn't really feel like it outside, but for Starbucks it is, especially in warm weather parts of the country. For summer, it means iced beverages and frappuccino. So when we think about turning the page and sort of getting into that mindset with our customer, we're thinking about not just earned media, but paid media, owned media, the way that the assets that we own can actually be flipped on, and that we can begin to engage in that way too. And so I guess it depends on the campaign, right? I don't know that there's a perfect answer for like, well, what percentage of this campaign should be earned and what percent should be paid. There's how we budget for it, and then I think there's how our customer engages with us. And I think a lot of the, aside from the secret sauce of kind of starting with our partners first in terms of the message, is also being flexible enough to know that there are times where in the middle of a campaign you have to be smart enough to say where we're really getting some traction with Frappuccino, or where we're really seeing customers engaged in our own space. We really see the Frappuccino page on Facebook sort of blowing up and sort of pivoting resources and attention to that. So, I guess the answer is yes. We're engaged in all of it, but I think the mix has to be variable depending on what the campaign is.
We do want to go to questions, but before I just want to ask you quickly, Corey, about Create Jobs USA.
Yes.
Big initiative. Can you talk?
How are we doing it?
Well, I have Starbucks.
Do you have a video?
Okay.
If we can get the videos going, I mean,
Yeah, I think we're okay.
but big initiative, something that has come out, and there's been a lot of play around that. But you just, is everyone familiar with the Create Jobs USA effort from Starbucks? Can you talk a little bit about that, and particularly in the context of communications?
They keep eating back. They love to make sure it's not hot. Okay. I'm going to tell the short version of this story just so we have room for the video. So at the tail end of Howard's book tour last year, we started to notice something really interesting. And here's what it was. We were at the Economic Club of Chicago. This would have been April. And Howard had kind of a stump speech that he was giving. And the stump speech was essentially lessons learned during the downturn and the things that we had to fix, many of which were self-induced mistakes. So we had ourselves to blame and kind of what we did to repair that. And then what we were learning as the economy was improving and our customers sort of coming back to us. But he was starting to close these speeches on an interesting note. So he would ask me before we would go to Los Angeles or Chicago or New York, how much debt is this state in? And the numbers were pretty scary, right? I mean, you'd be in California, and my answer to Howard would have to be like $50 billion in debt. Or you'd be in Illinois, and you'd be like $30 billion in debt. I mean, like giant, big, scary numbers. And he started to weave this into his talk track, and essentially what he was saying is the compact between public and private is starting to change, and that for a long time there's been this public safety net that we paid for through taxes and other means, and that gave people the ability when times were tough to be able to turn to government and say, I need help with healthcare, I need help with any number of different things. And Howard's point was, if that safety net is being eroded because of the debt load that these states are carrying and having to address that, doesn't that mean that private industry has a different obligation than it once did if you want to contribute to the health and well-being of your communities, and frankly, if you're trying to recruit people within those communities, you might have to pay more for health care. You might have to do things that you've never done before. And so that started a dialogue that by the time the fall rolled around had turned a little, it turned. Here's how it turned, is that there was the debt ceiling debacle going on in Congress, and Howard came back from his summer vacation, he was just hot. He was hot about it, that this thing is broken, it's wrong, I don't understand what's so hard about fixing something that's so fundamental. I mean, are you literally going to hold the country hostage to this debt mechanism? And he started to speak out about it in media interviews, and speaking out about it then turned into declaring that he was not going to contribute to the campaign funding of any incumbent politician, and he got 150 plus CEO friends to sign up and say they wouldn't do the same thing. Then we went from that episode to one in which we created a website around all of this, because this was sort of when, I don't know if you guys remember this would have been fall of last year, but I mean the media was just hot on this topic. I mean, like, jobs were problematic, unemployment was hovering around 10%, the debt was a problem, Congress was sort of in its stuck-in-this mode, and we were talking in the company about how do you take this moment and actually turn it into something good? How do you stop kind of railing against a system that may never really fix itself, and how do you contribute something that you uniquely can do? And so we started down this path of how do we get our customers engaged in contributing to this? How do we create jobs? I mean, literally that was as simple a question as it kind of came down to, was if we believe unemployment is the big problem, we're not a bank, right? We don't loan money, we don't do that kind of thing, but we do show up in 17,000 stores. We are in lots of different communities. We see the pain, we understand how hard it is for small business owners, which drives 65% of all job creation in this country, to get anything started. And there's all this TARP money sitting in banks, and like nobody's loaning any of it. So what is up? How do we help? So that is where this came from. A relatively simple idea, which kind of started with the rubber ring that Livestrong and others kind of made famous. But the idea was, can we sell something in our stores at zero benefit to Starbucks that takes all of the money and works with existing means of capital to fund jobs? And so we partnered with an organization called the Opportunity Finance Network, which has been around a long, long time. They actually have a real relationship with the Fed that goes back decades. And in turn, the OFN works with all these CDFIs, community-based banks, that are in a better position to loan money to small businesses because their risk profile is different. They can absorb some of the risk that a big bank might not be able to take on. And so we began selling these in November. We've used a couple of different media pushes to kind of get the word out, and we're to the point now where we've sold somewhere between 600 to 700,000 of these. When you use the way that the Opportunity Finance Network leverages the revenue that they take in at the local level, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. And so we believe, based on the most recent figures we've seen, that we've created somewhere around 4,000 jobs as a consequence of doing this. And now we're signing other companies up to do the same. So Banana Republic came on recently, Google came on recently, there'll be another couple of organizations in June that will come on board, and there'll be some things that we'll do in our stores between now and the general election to drive more revenue through merchandise sales, which will be kind of interesting. Again, none of this profits the company. It all goes directly to OFN. It all goes directly to creating jobs. And, we're not trying to sort of put ourselves out there as any particular example, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff we do wrong. But I think one thing that we do well is we do lead with our values. I think we make clear that, hopefully the video will work and we can see it, but during our annual meeting, crossing my fingers there, Danny. During the annual meeting, you know how annual meetings for the most part are kind of rah-rah things, right? I mean, company CEO gets up, board of directors are all sitting down in front, everybody's looking very happy, and essentially what you're doing is sort of playing a highlight reel for customers and for shareholders of how great the last year was. Well, this ain't that, okay? The video that we're going to show, it is totally not that. The point of the video was to kind of show just how difficult the world had been, not over the last year, but really over the last 4 or 5 years, and to show the kind of environment in which our customers were living, our partners were living, folks that we work with in communities were living, and to kind of say, we can only do what we can do, but we're going to do something. We're not going to stand by, we're not going to allow stuff to happen, we're going to be thoughtful, creative, and we'll find ways to get engaged. And so this program is just, it's a thing that we can do. It's a way that we can uniquely contribute to the economic difficulties of the country, and hopefully it galvanizes some action. Hopefully it shows that something can be done, and that other like-minded companies, organizations who also kind of lead with their hearts or think values are an important way to kind of show up every day will find their own way to contribute. And so that's what the video is. If it works, and I'll do Shadow Puppet Theater if it doesn't, but basically it's, our annual